Good afternoon. Sorry. Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the talk series at Serendipity Arts Festival, one of South Asia's largest multidisciplinary festivals that brings together performative, visual, and culinary practices from India and beyond. We are delighted to partner with Savasa Life magazine to present today's discussion, Unveiling Maya, a new mythology for our complex world. Swasa Life magazine from the century-old Majani Group is a luxury lifestyle publication that celebrates Indian heritage, craftsmanship, and intentional living. It inspires readers to explore community, design, culture, and entrepreneurship, all while appreciating the essence of Indian traditions. Our speakers today are Anand Gandhi and Zain Memon. Anand Gandhi is widely regarded as the film auteur who ushered in the new wave of Indian cinema. His first film, Ship of Theseus, won the National Award for Best Picture. His next film, Tumbat, a genre film which used horror as an allegory, became the region's most watched genre film of the last 2 decades. His non-fiction production, An Insignificant Man, was India's most commercially successful documentary film. Anand's films have won the highest honors at the International Film Festivals of Toronto, Venice, Transylvania, Tokyo, and Hong Kong. Zain Memon is a visionary game designer who has created Shasan and Azadi, the award-winning political strategy board games that have become India's most successful tabletop IP. Zain's games and authorship have introduced India to modern board games and created a new culture in the country. Shasan is now played in over 70 countries across the globe. Shasan and Azadi have also won some of the highest honors in the industry, including the Games for Change Award and the Indicade Award for Social Impact. Together, Anand and Zain are the founders of Mimesis, Department of Lore, and the creators of Maya, a new mythology unfolding across books, games, and films, which investigates questions of consciousness, justice, and the future of life. Over to our speakers.
Hi everyone. Thanks for coming out on a Sunday afternoon. I know I won't have. So before we get into what a mythology is and why we're building a mythology, we are going to talk about what a story is. Why do we tell stories? By we, I don't mean specifically Anand and me. I mean us as a species, as a people. And for the uninitiated people who haven't heard us speak before, we are going to start with what is a story. And you want to start?
And not just that. In fact, like I was of the impression that a lot of people who would come today are people who have heard us speak before. So maybe, in fact, it might be the other way around. So just to kind of get a quick sense of, is there anyone here today who has not heard us before?
Oh, great.
Okay, so bad for the ones who are repeating, because then we'll have to repeat ourselves a bit.
Yeah. There'll be a slightly long introduction.
Yeah, because the framework that we work with is so specific that we can't allude to or cite other frameworks and shorthand it. Invariably, we have to introduce you through the alphabet, through the building blocks of our framework, even before we start talking about the lexicon and the syntax of why we do what we do. So
let's start there. Why we do what we do. Yeah, that's a good place to start, because that's an existential question we posed ourselves a few years ago. Why are we doing what we are doing instead of working on engineering that specifically solves world hunger directly, instead of working on specific education protocols? Why are we doing what we're doing, and does it even have any impact whatsoever? So what do we do? What do we do?
Right. So I mean, of course, we use the medium of story, and it's such a broad umbrella term that we take it for granted. We start thinking of it as it's so all encompassing of so many different kinds of human enterprises that we start thinking of story as the one that as the kind of story that we consume last, right? Like we invariably I get asked, so what do you think of this film or that film or some other filmmaker's work, or Zain gets asked about a game designer's work, and invariably we end up saying that we have nothing to do with the medium itself, really. It just happened so that that medium is an extremely powerful medium for us to do what we intend to do.
And specifically for that story, because we have had the privilege of shifting mediums our entire life. Anand's worked in theatre, television, film, non-fiction. I have also dabbled in those. We've also made games together. We have Vinay with us at the back over there, who's India's premier
Vinay here?
documentary filmmaker.
Oh.
Yeah, at the back.
Already. When I made While We Watched, he's the director of While We Watched, yeah. And Vinay now leads the game studio. We have that agnosticism of medium. We are very medium agnostic at our studios, and we shift quite rapidly, and we keep ourselves agile. And the reason for doing that is more in continuity with why we do it. And here's a thought. Here's something that we ask ourselves constantly, and these are the answers that we found. We ask ourselves if stories truly have any resonance or meaning or impact at all, or is it just something that we do out of as a means of self-discovery or self-extension or expression? Is there any other larger utility to this most ancient technology that we have at our disposal as a civilization? And it's also the most underutilized technology. Now think about it this way: a 9-year-old girl somewhere in central India watches a film, watches a TV show called Star Trek, and 28 years later, Dr. Swati Mohan lands Perseverance on Mars, lands
The Mars rover, yeah.
the Mars rover on Mars and leads the Mars mission at NASA.
Simultaneously, there was a story that was told when I was younger. It was told by this man who said that there's someone very, very evil living in a land far, far away who is against everything we hold good in dear. And if not acted upon urgently, that person would destroy our entire way of life. A war was waged against that person. After millions of people were killed, displaced, lives destroyed, nations destroyed, we were told that no weapons of mass destructions were ever found in Iraq. A story was told to us, and that story weaponized our intentions to destroy nations. So while we understand the power of story, we also understand the responsibility of story and how irresponsibly stories have been told, and perhaps there needs to be a serious check on the power and the weaponization of story.
And if you look at the last century, there are hundreds of these are not one-off examples. There are thousands of these examples of how stories have informed policy, how they've informed socio-political climates, they've informed engineering, they've informed what we prioritize. And we realize when we are looking at this phenomenon, and of course we are shorthanding quite a bit of ideas here. But
okay, let's not shorthand. Okay, yeah. Show of hands. How many of you have heard Anand or me speak about barn swallows? Oh, great.
Okay, great. So we have an audience that hasn't. So, okay, great. Awesome. Because we were worried about repeating ourselves. So a lot of this thesis we have been sharing our frameworks and our thesis for many years now. So a lot of what we have shared is out there.
And until we get the discipline of actually putting it down to a book, you're going to keep speaking about it.
Yeah. So here's an idea that we investigated. We said we are clearly very vulnerable to storytelling. We are very vulnerable to being shifted, our beliefs and our behaviors being shaped by story. And the two examples that we just took of the Bush administration talking about just literally narrativizing the fear of weapons of mass destruction and eventually shaping public policy that led to a multi-trillion-dollar war on one hand. Ayn Rand's impact on libertarianism, all the way down to Elon Musk and Trump today in the US. There are multiple examples where stories have informed beliefs, behaviors, policies, and the way we treat each other, the way we live with each other, the way we think of ourselves and the universe around us and the climate around us for generations, with a very, very high degree of impact, and with the kind of impact that we kind of almost forget about because it's so invisible. And we asked ourselves, why is it that we are so clearly, that our beliefs, our behaviors are so easily hackable, they're so vulnerable to storytelling.
Yeah. And again, getting down to the center of the question, we were like, what is this amorphous we talk about? Are we talking about humans? Are humans specifically the only species susceptible to storytelling? And that took us to a bird called the barn swallow. The barn swallows are socially monogamous, which means they mate for life, like penguins or humans, or most humans, and not in Goa though. And but when scientists from Colorado University were studying the barn swallows, they noticed a pattern. The women were often caught cheating on the sly, which means the males thought they were monogamous, but the males were raising eggs or young ones that were not their own.
So scientists investigated into this phenomenon and they said, okay, why is it that these females are cheating on the slide? And it's not that all females are cheating, only some females are cheating on their partners. So what's going on? Is there a pattern or is this completely arbitrary? Is there something that is visible about this? Something that we can glean from this? And sure enough, they found a pattern. They did find that females in the species were very attracted to males with very deep red brownish chests. Like the deeper, the more saturated the chest feathers, the more they were attractive to the females. Why was it so? Because as it turns out with barn swallows, the oxidation properties of blood reveal themselves as just an artifact in the color of the feathers. So the higher the disease fighting capacity of the barn swallow, the deeper the color of the feathers. Now the female barn swallow didn't go to science school, did not have to study biology to make this connection, to understand that that deeper red chest means higher disease fighting capacity. Natural selection, evolution has programmed her intelligence, has programmed her ability to respond to the feathers in such a manner with this desire of mating, so that she will have healthy children, which has been shaped by, again, the forces of natural selection. Females who did not choose males with deep red chests had unhealthy children who died off, and hence the genes did not carry forward, versus females who have this quality of being attracted to red, have red feathers, have come from females who made these choices, and hence the genes are still carrying forward. So survival of the fittest is actually a tautology. Survival and fit are the same things. The fit, the machinery, the mechanisms, the algorithms that lead to fitness are the algorithms that lead to survival. In this case, the female falling deeply in love with a red-chested male.
But some of the males in the socially monogamous society were not as deep-chested. So obviously other males were more attractive, and the males siring more children. So scientists did something very interesting. They took the males that were being scorned, and they took a $1 felt tip marker from a shop down the road.
Just like a red sketch pen.
Yeah. And they rubbed it on the chest of the scorned, non-attractive male barn swallows.
And
what do you think happened?
voila, there were instant hits with the ladies. They were like absolutely getting laid left, right, and center.
Not only were they siring their own children, the children of their own partners, but also they were the ones who are being cheated with. And look, they're not making this up. This is actually scientific, peer-reviewed studies.
Not just that. It's that this is not unique to barn swallows. This is not a one-off thing that happens in nature. This is not a quirk of nature. This is the kind of thing that is going on all the time, and not just in every other species. This is the fundamental building block of pretty much a large number of human enterprises and human entrepreneurship.
Yeah, let's not kid ourselves that, the barn swallows are stupid. Of course, humans wouldn't fall for something like this. I know all of you have some examples in your mind. It could be Salman Khan's abs being airbrushed on. It could be as a sign for genetic fitness. It could be the makeup industry. It could be filters on social media that create these markers that stand for symbols of fitness or attractiveness.
And genetic fitness, of course, with humans is far more complex. There is social fitness. So females don't necessarily put makeup on only to attract potential male partners, but they also put makeup on to showcase genetic fitness with other females, with female peers. So with humans, it's far more complex, and it takes far more complex emergent phenomena of cosmetics and cosmetics signing that starts revealing itself.
Now imagine if an industry existed for barn swallows where one barn swallow had figured out sketch pens. Would they be a barn swallow billionaire? Would they have inconsiderable sway over barn swallow politics? Because within human society that happens. There are there are some of us who have figured out these hacks. Not only are they rich and powerful, but they have lots of powers in how the world works, and the ideas we believe in, and the politics that we sign up for.
And the other thing that we need to be also very aware of is you can figure out hacks through brute force. You don't need to study evolutionary biology. Like the barn swallows don't need to study evolutionary biology to know that red means beautiful, and it's beautiful because it's genetically fit. So all we require in this simulation for a barn swallow to figure out is that there is such a thing called a red marker. For whatever reason, we don't know what the reason is. The barn swallow billionaire does not need to figure out what the reason for its efficacy is, but somehow it works. And as long as it works, it can be sold. It can be sold to a very large group of barn swallows who are scorned and rejected, and to use on themselves, to hack, with the explicit purpose of hacking the behavior of another group of barn swallows. And that's really quite precisely how a wide variety of human industries work, from cosmetics to pornography to even politics. We learn through brute force, and we have learned through accumulated brute force over thousands of years these markers, these felt tip markers, and where to lace them and how much to spread them over the over an idea, or a story, or a phenomenon, or an event, or a person, to mark them as attractive or unattractive, as to mark them as beautiful or threatening. And that is really what we do with our stories all the time.
And that considerable power in the public square often comes with a very, very nonchalant dismissal of, oh, I'm just entertaining you. I'm not necessarily responsible for what is being said over here, because if you have a problem with it, don't listen to it. But that's not how these hacks work. These hacks are very, very powerful, and when deployed at scale, especially by the state, or especially by people of great means, can be greatly powerful, both positively and negatively. You want to talk about games before you get into mythology?
Yeah, well, in a moment, like,
Sure.
would just like to kind of wrap this
Yeah.
up. So the idea that we landed upon is that stories are extremely powerful for this very function, for their ability to mark certain things as in red, to amplify the concept of either genetic fitness or genetic threat, and more often than not they amplify threat, because we are more attuned to, again, evolutionary attuned to respond to threat and anxiety than we are to things that are already going well. Because if things are going well, it's not necessarily an immediate, it does not require our immediate attention. But if there is anything that is off about the environment, it requires our immediate attention, and that's how we are programmed again. So a wide variety of stories invariably use this red marker, this felt tip marker, that draws our attention quite instantly and immediately, and almost sometimes very addictively, because you can keep on making these markers and you can keep on drawing human attention to them, and which is what social algorithms are increasingly about. They draw our attention to things that more often than not could be engineered to draw our attention at multiple levels, from some degree of seduction and beauty, like the case of the felt tip markers, with some degree of threat involved in it, that there is someone else who's using the felt tip marker, so what's going to happen to you, kind of thing.
Yeah, in the absence of immediate direct threats are then manufactured or invented. That other, the amorphous other, there's always one. It's someone who maybe looks different, speaks different, lives in a different climate, who is out there to capture everything that's near and dear to you.
And we said this is really the kind of thing that's going on with films and television all the time. If you really walk into any kind of really anywhere in the world, if you were to walk into a creative writing program, or a workshop, or a film making workshop, film screenplay workshop, or novel writing workshop, invariably you'll see people. I'll wake up in a moment and then I'll be far more cohesive. So invariably you'll see people really exchange with each other tools of hacking each other's hacking our attention behavior. When you go to a writing workshop, what you hear from people is, oh, if you follow the hero's journey, if you follow the 3 act structure, if you create tension and then you release tension, you create an ordeal and release it with a reward, but then you create another higher ordeal. These are the kind of tools that are exchanged all the time, which is basically a recipe of these felt tip markers, which is a wide variety.
Yeah, or in game design, it's like, okay, use a slot machine mechanic over here, then a hidden betrayal mechanic over here, and you'll have 13-year-olds hooked for life.
Absolutely. You have the ladder mechanism, you have building to
Level ups, unlocks, gacha mechanics, all of that.
So it's this kind of vocabulary is emerges because these are ideas that are used so often in creating recipes to hack into human behavior and to hack into human attention, that that there is an entire science to it now. There is an entire engineering to it, and that's the kind of engineering that is being distributed all the time. So to say that, oh, I'm just doing it for entertainment, is exactly the equivalent of being a barn solo and saying, well, I'm just distributing these markers because because women get entertained by them, not knowing how that particular performance is manipulative and uses very specific vulnerability and susceptibility, which is evolutionary in nature and not not cognitive in nature, towards hacking the behavior of somebody who's completely susceptible and unsuspecting of such a hack. And that's really what happens when we take the whole enterprise of narrative engineering as lightly as we do. We saw in the last few decades how we became increasingly aware of our food consumption habits. We started, in fact, so much so that we started having a we gave it a phrase, we gave it a name. We called it junk food. You want to talk about junk food and like how susceptible we are to junk culture, and for a moment, and
Sure.
then we kind of bring it home.
How many of you enjoy eating sugar? How many of you know it's bad for your health? More so. Sugar, when we say we enjoy sugar and ask the question, the response I normally get is, oh, because it's sweet. Yes, why is it sweet? Why is our body incentivizing us to eat sugar? It's simply because when humans evolved in forest and savanna environments, carbohydrates or energy was scarce. So when you found energy through evolution, natural selection, our body incentivized it, saying, if you find carbs, eat carbs, it's good for you. So if more carbs, more better. Not knowing that perhaps there could exist a world 100,000 years later where there could be enough carbs in one bite as you would require for 2 days of energy. So a strawberry cheesecake seems like the best thing in the world because there are no upper limiters. It's not, oh, if more carbs, better until this limit. Our body does not know that. And
our body didn't have to learn that, because in 3 billion years, there was never a situation like the one that we are in now. So for 3 billion years, life has evolved in profound scarcity, in forest and savanna environments of profound threat, where there was never a situation that you had all the carbs that you can ever dream of in one pack, in one bite.
And that's led to the junk food epidemic that we talk about. The same applies for media. There is such a thing as junk media. Ideas that perhaps at one point evolutionarily were useful for us. Threats that were real, threats that were not manufactured, problems that we had to solve. That, hey, if you have learnt agriculture, build a wall. Because perhaps one day there will be a famine and you will not have food because someone else who didn't grow it will come and take it. But right now we have enough food on earth to feed 10 billion plus people, even though we have only 8 billion people, out of which 2 billion go hungry.
And E.O. Wilson puts this problem very, very beautifully. He says that the greatest problem in front of humanity is this, that we have Stone Age emotions, we have industrial age institutions, and we have space age technologies. And we deploy space age technologies through the bureaucracy and prejudices and biases of industrial age institutions with an extremely ill-equipped Stone Age behavior system, Stone Age emotional system, where we feel jealous and angry, and we feel hatred, and we feel fear, and we hoard, and we feel greedy. These are experiences and emotions that evolved in in the scarcity of forests and savannas, and should possibly not have any role whatsoever in the abundance of modern society, in modern civilization. But we still use these emotions and use the institutions that evolved for a completely different purpose with the technology that we have. So what do we get? We have the ability to grow food in space. How mind-boggling is that, right? No life exists, nothing can exist in space, and we have found a way for biology to exist and thrive in space. So we make food in space. We have that technology on one hand, and on the other, we don't feed half the human population.
Because logistics doesn't make sense.
So we said, what is our role then? What is our role, and what is really going on? And we think what is going on is that storytellers have not been doing their job right. They've been just selling each other felt tip markers. They've been selling each other. They've been engaging our attention with just red chests or six packs or whatever. They've been engaging our attentions with things that our attention is very susceptible to being engaged by. Our attention is extremely susceptible to stories of seduction, stories of romance, stories of violence, of conquest, stories of stories of a response to the threat of violence, and hence the notion of justice in the face of violence. We are very susceptible to be engaged by these stories, and hence what we don't end up engaging with, which is what storytellers ought to have done in the last century, is engage our attention towards the complexity of civilization that we are trying to build, and the complex problems that emerge thereof. When 1 billion human beings or 8 billion human beings try to live together in a framework, it's unprecedented. No other life form has ever tried to achieve that, and we have achieved that to some degree of success. The network effect of human life, the network effect of human wisdom, has led to peace in some pockets, has led to sustenance in some pockets, has led to the ability for many groups of humans to, not all of us, but many groups of humans to experience dignity, equity, liberty, things that are not available to any life form in nature. Nature is inherently violent. Only a few species within nature reached a point of society, reached the 16 to 18 species.
I'm going to spoil Goa mornings for them. You wake up in the morning, you have a nice forest in front of you, you hear nature. It sounds beautiful, right? Well, to me it doesn't. To me it's a little repulsive, and I'll tell you why. With the sound you hear, the chirping, the cawing, the screeching, is not the animals having the best time of their life. Most animals do not understand consent. It is the sound of violence, it's sound of rape and plunder and murder.
It's basically it's basically like
the natural way of life is violent. The human aspiration, I'm not saying the way of life, we haven't achieved it yet. The human aspiration, the civilization aspiration here is perhaps we don't be violent. Perhaps we share. Perhaps we take care of each other. When Margaret Mead was asked, what is a sign that a people has been civilized when you are archaeologically studying peoples? She said, a healed femur bone. A healed femur bone is the sign that a group of people is now civilized. Because if your femur bone is broken back in the day, it is most likely that you will not be able to take care of yourself and you will die. But if a group of people has collectively decided and civilized themselves, saying, this person is one of us and they need to be taken care of, to a point that the femur bone can now heal fully, that is a very sure shot sign of estimating how civilized the group of people was that you're studying archaeologically.
And that also, because those 3 people or 4 people, the 2 people that one requires to nurse somebody whose femur bone has been broken, those 3 are unproductive members of society for at least a year. For a society to emerge to a point where it can afford the presence of 3 non-producing members of a society, that society surely has technology, and has social and political technology, which is what we would call enlightenment.
Again, by technology we don't necessarily mean science and tech, we mean laws, we mean rules, we mean proto-laws called ethics or morals. And every so often, this idea that we're talking about has been there are people that have to execute it. A civilizational effort to create a story, a, a massive story, and we'll arrive at the word I'm trying to get at over here, that creates narratives that are rich, lush, very, very urgent, immediate, almost seems like it's us, but at the same time, distance enough to not be us. That becomes a blueprint for us to know what to do and know what not to do. That becomes a sea for us to filter our anxieties and our aspirations. And that civilizational project that has happened successfully a few times is called mythology. And the
You want to quickly, like, because I think we've jumped
Sure.
around quite a we've
Yes.
jumped quite a few steps ahead. We want to kind of pull back and talk about story before we go into mythology and lore. So very quickly, the examples. So what we spoke about so far very quickly is that there is sufficient evidence that stories have impact. We talked about how the Bush administration impacted policy and created a $1 trillion war. How we took some other examples of how stories have had positive impact. There is sufficient evidence that stories influence us. We looked at the evolutionary biology of how stories influence us. We saw that in barn swallows there is sufficient evidence across species. Tim Bergen is a mythologist who started some of this work a few decades ago, looking at the behaviors of multiple species when given a slight narrative change, a narrative amplification or a narrative trigger, and saw how the behaviors are so easily susceptible to manipulation and how the behaviors can be hacked into extremely easily, like engineering. It's always the same fixed action pattern and response. So you create the same stimulus, you'll always get the same response, or like you would in a machine. And we link that to how there are several examples of that's the kind of thing that's happening in our life all the time through social media algorithms, through political narratives, through media narratives. We are susceptible to our beliefs and our behaviors being hacked and engineered by very specific recipes of these felt tip markers that we saw barn swallow behavior being hacked by. So what is the function of story? How is it that story is the vessel through which we are being informed, that we are being hacked and engineered by? Why is story and what is story really? That's something that we investigated quite a bit into, which is what's the function of, let's say, a cave painting. Let's go back to some of the most primitive, some of the most early forms of stories that we know we have recorded in human history, and let's try and investigate what do you think is the proto function of story, the first few functions of story in our species.
So most life transmits information down its chain biologically through natural selection and through genetics. But humans have been able to do something that most other species don't do as effectively, which is we are able to pass down information non-biologically. We're able to tell each other through cave painting, through vibrations of our tongue, through gestures of our hand, how to hunt, how to gather mushrooms, how to take care of the sick, what to eat and what not to eat. And that has allowed us to compound experiences of 104 billion people who came before us, and create information that is stored so beautifully that and so seamlessly that biology could never encode it so quickly in so much. And this non-biological data is what we're talking about.
And also remember, biology of course takes hundreds of thousands of years to encode any kind of information,
Even the smallest information,
a smallest piece of information, because the way natural selection works, of course, is through pressures of life and death. If only when a large number of a large percentage of a species dies out for not having a certain behavior, the species that has that particular behavior passes on that particular behavior, and so on and so forth. With rapid changes that happen in an environment, we do not have a response system. The response system that humans came up with, that was very unique to our species, was to record these changes, record these specificities in methods that are not biological. And cave painting is one of the first examples that we know of. Or language, even human language is one of the first examples that we know of this technology, where we through this non-biological means, through making representations, through making signages, through making strokes on wall, we pass on, we encode in it information, and we pass on information to each other, even horizontally, not just vertically, not just to the next few generations, but also to each other within our lifetimes. So if you look at the proto examples of cave painting, they're invariably
Hunting, gathering.
they're proto-sciences. Yeah, they are objective information about the world. They are an objective record of the world around you. They are also objective process informations. Methodologies are being shared. How to hunt, how to find berries, how to hunt mushrooms, how to hide away from threat, how to But then, as cave paintings evolved, you also start seeing the infusion of subjective experience. This is how your mother, found berries. This is not just the only way of finding berries. This is not the objective way of finding berries. So that's where art comes in. Art is,
Or how I feel when I don't find berries, or how I feel, forget nutrition, how I feel when I don't find berries that I like.
and what do I do about it? I feel hungry and I feel extremely angry at that point, but invariably I have realized over a period of time that it's not efficient to be so angry, because I ended up killing my last husband or partner or whatever, right? Like when I was so hungry. So as a result, I have now learned this technique, this methodology, that every time I'm hungry, this is what I do. I count in my head, or I look at the sky and I count the stars or whatever. And the moment you start talking about these techniques and infuse the storytelling, they infuse the cave painting, you get art. You get not just science, but you get proto-science. You get you get social science. You get you get post-science. You start arriving at the use of story to record not just the world, but record the interiority, the experience, the extremely qualitative, unquantifiable experience of that particular person in that particular time, which is also then passed on as an algorithm, as not just a single hack, but a stack of many hacks. It's a stack of algorithms that we start passing on in the form of stories. So stories start becoming a priority machine. It takes the form of a priority engine. Stories start telling us what to prioritize when, what to do first, and starts prioritizing our cadence. What behavior should follow what. Do not follow your intuition here. Your intuition your intuition is making you very, very jealous right now, but don't worry, you will find another partner. There are too many pebbles of the show. Stories start helping us hack our intuitive biological algorithm, our instincts, our deeply hardwired algorithms that have evolved and accumulated in us for 3 billion years.
They also do one more thing. They also, instead of just recording experience, like Anand said, in past, and things that we have first-hand experience subjectively or objectively, they also become a tool for us to ask what ifs. What if I did this? Things that biology could never do, hypotheses that genetic coding could never do, and it becomes a hypothesis machine. What does the future look like? What could happen in the future? What does an ideal life for me look like? What happens if I mix this with this? Perhaps let's investigate, and that allows us to paint dreams and nightmares of the future.
So stories become a simulation engine. They become our way to fill up data gaps and to use data to create completely new worlds and new ways of living and being that have never existed before.
A dystopic world is, okay, what if patriarchy but extreme? What if famine but extreme? A utopic world, usually, especially in science fiction, is what if everything is perfect, but this ideal that we are now proposing is taken to its extreme? Does that actually look utopic, or is that going to cause more problems down the road? So all science fiction, all stories, all even romantic stories, what happens when people of two communities that haven't mixed with each other get into a relationship? What does that hypothesis look like? These hypotheses are not fact. These hypotheses are not exact science, but they're important.
So the greatest human ability is foresight. That's very specific to our species. Again, we from the little data that we have of all the other animals, we know that there has to be some degree of simulation in any form of intelligence. Intelligence is pattern recognition, which means that if something has happened in this method n number of times, the n plus 1 is likely to follow the same rhythm, the same cadence, or the same behavioral the repetition. And that is what intelligence is. It's pattern recognition, and by that virtue, embedded within intelligence is foresight, is the ability to see what's going to happen next. Within that, our species has an incredible ability for foresight. We can take the data of the past and foresee quite far into the future, sometimes quite accurately even. So our greatest ability is foresight, and the engine for foresight is hindsight, and the fuel to run this engine is insight. When we are able to connect dots, when we are able to connect extremely disparate systems that don't seem to be speaking to each other, that exist in silos, and we start building relationships between these systems, insights emerge. And through hindsight, which is data, applying insight, which is algorithms that we have passed on with each other and shared with each other through stories, we create foresight. And there, lore emerges. Now we are moving in the territory of lore, of mythology. We are talking about sum total aggregates of stories. We are talking about the ability to create a framework of story, not just a story, but a framework of stories that allows for contradiction. Because life exists at the cusp of contradictions. Life exists, universe is chaotic, but there is order at a local level, which is what biology is. Life itself is order in the face of chaos, order in the face of entropy.
It's an attempt to overthrow entropy.
It's a temporary attempt. It's a transient attempt, but it's still an attempt to pause entropy or to slow down entropy at a local level. That's what life is. Is life transient or is it permanent? Seen from the perspective of the individual body, it's transient. Seen from the lens of the genome, it's pretty much permanent, because for 3 billion years, the genome that existed in the first living cell, some copy of it, some form of it exists in all of us today.
The mitochondria is eternal, right?
And the mitochondria is always there. So life is transient and permanent. There is chaos and order. Things are constantly changing. Things are always the same. There is this gorgeous line in Cinema Paradiso. He says, when you go back to your hometown 2 years down the road, when you return to your hometown, you feel everything has changed. And if you return 20 years later, you feel everything is still the same. Life exists at the cusp of this constant transient and constant permanence. You go back 3,000 years, you'll find stories about how there were people writing letters to each other saying, children don't listen to each other, they've become too woke, they've become, they've started coloring their hair, and they've started like putting tattoos on their body, and they
look at this unnatural sex they're having.
And all this unnatural sex they are having. Politicians are, you go 3,000, 6,000 years back, and you'll see the same stories repeating themselves, and still there is some specificity that emerges within our times. We have never, climate crisis as we are witnessing it is unprecedented. The ability of self-feeding algorithms to inform our beliefs, to manipulate our behaviors at such a massive scale is unprecedented. That's something that is not biologically alive, is pretty much all pervading today. When we first did this talk, it's almost an annual tradition now that we come here. Swasa has been very kind to invite us every year, and this is like the third time,
Yeah.
The fourth time.
Third.
And the first time
Third
we
time
came
here, fifth time otherwise. Yeah.
At
Delhi.
Serendipity. Oh, right, with Swasa, yeah.
Yeah.
So the first time we came here, Zain and I asked the room, how many of you have heard Chat GPT? And there was one one hand that had gone up, right? We won't even ask that question at this point.
But coming back to what we were talking about earlier.
Yeah.
So this attempt, this experiment, hey, let's create a mythology and over story to trump all stories, the stories that becomes a filter for our anxieties, has been done before. But it has inherited something from a feeling that our genetic information also has, is that it doesn't come with an expiry date. It doesn't come with saying, okay, this mythology, this story, this way of looking at the world is great for now. Because the question of whether you should kill your cousin at war is important right now, but maybe in 2,000 years you will not be going to war with your neighbors. And the question is not as urgent. So mythologies historically have done their job, and beautifully so, for the moment that they were written in. But they do not, like many stories, like our genetic code, come with expiry dates. So what if a mythology came that is a mythology for the people for the time of now, that is constantly evolving, and at the core of it has principles in play and not characters.
So that's when we started talking, when we started thinking about what kind of stories we ought to tell. We asked ourselves this question in earnest. We said, if you take the aura out, if you remove the aura that accumulates over thousands of years, and especially in the in the world that we are in, with the region that we are a part of and that we have inherited,
And just objectively, like, just look at the job role and not again the institutions built around it.
then what's the job role of the Buddha, right? Like what's really the
Job role of Kabir.
job role of Kabir? If you really think about that, it is really to do this. It is to to synthesize, distill, and transmit with fable. What does that mean? It means take the greatest ideas, insights, frameworks that the civilization has at its disposal, coming from cognitive neurobiology, coming from evolutionary sciences, coming from investigations into the future of human policy, coming from whether or not our democratic systems are resilient enough or agile enough to keep up with our needs as peoples with multiple needs and multiple worldviews, coming from democratic systems, coming from quantum physics, coming from everywhere. Synthesize them, because they often work in silos. So synthesize them, see where they speak to each other, how they speak to each other. How does our understanding of evolutionary biology inform what we know or what we took for granted about economics, or how does our understanding of geology and topography inform our understanding of local politics and local policies? And we start seeing that these are deeply connected. Obviously, they are far deeply connected than we have been taught by our education as we grew up. So the job really is to synthesize them, to merge them together, to create a framework that considers all of them, and then translate the insights of this framework, translate the principles of this framework, the prescriptions of this framework, the possibilities of this framework into a language that humanity understands without having to go to school, which is the language of fable, which is the language of story. That is really the job role of a Buddha or a Vyasa or a Valmiki.
Which hijacks all the Banswala principles, which makes which makes it seem urgent and important, and something you must do it right, you must solve right now, or something that seems exciting and seductive. Very, very intimate, very, very urgent, but not personal. And by that I mean, sorry.
Can I ask a question?
Just after I finish this thought, yeah.
Are we going to Q&A? Yeah, we can go into Q&A in like
Q&A
in another couple of minutes. Yeah.
But at the same time, not personal. By that I mean, if I tell you that historically this nation, or your people, or your community has done this, and perhaps that's not the right way to do things, most of us will put our walls up. Most of us will take it personally. How do I create an allegory that is simultaneously urgent? You understand what is being spoken about, but you don't feel attacked. You don't feel personally challenged. That's what mythology allows us to do. It's very familiar, but it's not us.
With stories, we have been told for thousands of years that all stories at the primarily are either about people falling in love, or it's about good versus evil. And while we thought that is, we empathize with where that worldview must have come from in times of scarcity and times when there was such a thing as you versus the other, because you were safeguarding something that the other did not understand and could very well come and violate. In a world that is deeply polarized, in a world that is so susceptible and vulnerable to constant polarization, that story is doing the exact opposite of what it meant to do. It is not enriching human life. It is not enriching our sustenance and our well-being. It is in fact perpetuating the ideas of us versus them, the idea that situates you within the good, because there is nobody who's ever watching or hearing any great story and thinking that, oh, I'm the evil.
Or no one is saying, oh yeah, I am the bad guy in this world. No one thinks of themselves as the bad guy.
I'm pretty certain, at least like for a large percentage people of humanity, there's of course an outlier percentage, but there's a large percentage of humanity that is quite convinced of their goodness in even when they are undertaking the most evil and heinous actions against humanity. How many of you think that war is sometimes necessary?
I would reframe that. I would say
Right. So do you think that? No?
Well, I mean, if you look at
Sorry, can you have a microphone, please?
the International Committee of the Red Cross, right? Like who are the guardians?
Sorry, just 1 second, so that everyone at the back can hear you. I'm just passing a mic to you.
You know, if you look at the Geneva Conventions that came out of World War II and the atrocities that happened there, and the International Committee of the Red Cross, you know, they don't look at trying to create a world without war. It's about creating war that's more humane. I think to be human is to war. I think instinctively, and then I think politically,
To be human is to.
Is to kill.
it's to be in conflict. I think part of the human experience is part of our identity is conflict. I don't think you could say the human experience is devoid of conflict. It's part of
I understand that's not devoid of conflict, but would you say the human experience is conflict? Is that
war is a
is that a
form of-
universal objective experience?
War is conflict, but
Right.
I would also ask the question. You know, you're talking about stories are a form of information, but oftentimes a lot of stories that we embrace are false stories,
Agreed.
and oftentimes what humans don't like, or our biology doesn't like, is uncertainty. So we'd rather believe a falsehood to deal with our uncertainty, even if that falsehood actually creates more problems.
That's
because
right.
it's-
So,
and then-
so the
can I
unfortunate
say-
thing that
can I
I'm
say
sorry,
a
but
third?
I'm sorry to interrupt, but the challenge that has happened right now is that because you came midway, we had covered quite a bit of that
Oh, I'm sorry, okay.
even before we
The first story we spoke about was about misinformation.
was about
About-
misinformation and about why we are susceptible. What is the evolutionary biology? What is the evolutionary function of our susceptibility to misinformation and to falsehood, to false stories? So that's something that we spent quite a bit of time on, unfortunately.
Excellent,
Which,
okay.
yeah. But yeah, please,
And
yeah.
then the last thing I was going to say, like going forward in the future, where we now have this idea of transhumanism, right? And not only transhumanism, is that my friends, I'm associated with people that are working in AI at CERN and other places, is that we're on the brink of creating human identities, human-like identities that can actually be self-motivated and create their own stories for themselves and create a parallel world outside of the human experience.
Right. Sorry, what's your name?
Dan.
Dan, what has happened is because of because you could not perhaps join us when we started.
Yeah, sorry.
You're
I'm coming at the
There's
end.
some context,
You're
but
coming
I
at
want
the
to
end
respond
and
to that, to the transhumanism bit a bit.
Yeah, we did cover some amount of falsehood. We talked about the evolutionary function of stories and why we are susceptible to that. And one very important part that we covered that you spoke about in the beginning, which is being human or part of human experience, is being in conflict. We in fact covered that quite in depth about how life has emerged from conflict. For 3 billion years, 3 billion years ago, one form of life came up with this idea that, hey, instead of making my own energy, won't it be wonderful if I can just like hack into the energy of another? There is a word for it. There is a word for stealing the energy of
And
another life
transforming
form and transforming it, cleansing it of the information stored within that energy system, and reusing it for storing your own information in it.
Any takers?
Do you know what the word for that is? The word for decimating, destroying, deconstructing a life form
And its matter.
and its matter, and repurposing the matter for your own energy use and for storing your own DNA. There is a word for it. What's the word for it?
It's called eating.
It's called eating. Right? So somebody back in the day, 3 billion years ago, figured out, hey, if I just eat another life form, I don't have to create my own energy. And hence, that is embedded in every life form, all the way to humans. But there is something that happened with the emergence of human societies, which is what we covered at length, where the network effect of human wisdom and the network effect of human desire to create more certainty for more of us, to create more dignity, to create more equity for more of us. None of these exist in nature. But because our network effect allowed us to look at data and simulate very vast futures, long-term futures, we came up with new technologies, which is what we call policy, which is what we first called religion and then we called constitution. We came up with a collective policy to not murder each other, to not eat each other, to not steal from each other, now that's not very effective, it's not very efficient, and that's why we need the Red Crosses in the world. That's why we need watchdogs, that's why we need, because Like you rightly said, human beings are in conflict. Not just human beings. Life is in a constant state of war. That's something that we covered as well at length, which is how nature inherently is replete with violence, rape, and murder, which is something that Zain spoke of a moment ago. And so is human life, because we are a part of nature. We are extensions of nature. We are nature, and hence we have inherited all the vestiges of nature. But through our ingenuity, through our abilities to not predate upon each other, through our foresight that it would be wonderful to create a world where we don't predate on each other, where we don't end up killing each other, where we don't end up being at a constant state of war. First we have to agree to such a state. First we have to agree that yes, such a state of being is possible. You may as well,
Or desirable even.
or desirable even. You may as well say that no, the cost benefit doesn't add up. That's never going to happen. You can be a cynic about it, and you cannot show up.
And why should
on
I
the
even
work desk.
be
So,
kind about
like that.
disagreements?
You
But
can-
sorry, and
Yeah.
before Shreya and Akansha tell us to
Yeah.
wrap up,
Yeah.
I want to get to the subject matter,
Yeah,
which
but
is
we'll talk about that in a moment. Yeah,
the subject matter, which is unveiling Maya.
Unveiling Maya, which is what we are doing. So we said, okay, can we respond to questions that are far more urgent? If you want a question about why humans should not be at war, for the last 3,000 years, people have been trying to say that, and to some extent, we have achieved
Or what kinds of war are
decades of
good?
peace. What kinds of war are completely eradicable, what kinds we are still dealing with that we still have not found a way to eradicate. But what kind of violences can be completely eradicated, what kind of violences we are still dealing with that we still don't know ways of eradicating. Fair enough. So that's a question that we have been asking for 3,000 years. There is enough material around that for 3,000 years. That is something that you brought up, Dan, very quickly to respond to that and everything that leading up to
Another
that.
question is,
which
if you are born in a world, in a community, in a family of the haves, where you have inherited a lot, either through your country or through your community or through anything, and even if you do recognize that what you have inherited is perhaps at the cost of people before you, how do you give it up? How do you share it? How do you achieve or attempt to achieve equanimity? Because hey, you didn't ask to be born in a country that is rich or in a people that is rich. Do you have to live with the guilt? And how much is enough when you start giving away?
So we started considering questions that we felt are urgent, questions of transhumanism, questions that are unprecedented, and hence people who came before us, hence Valmiki and Kalidas did not have to necessarily respond to, though they tried to speculate and respond to in their own ways, one can argue, but did not have to respond to with the urgency that we have. Questions of climate crisis, questions of what it looks like when a non-biological entity like AGI, which is around
knocking
the
on our
corner,
doors.
is knocking
Yeah.
at our doors right now, literally, and that's going to be controlled by 2,000 people on the planet, and have hence the ability through this literally God in machine to really inform the behaviors of 8 billion people. What does that world look like, and how can the 8 billion people respond to being a part of such a world? So there are so many questions that are unprecedented, and we understand that the responses are very easily vulnerable to a very specific kind of storytelling. Like this kind of storytelling that we just did right now is can perhaps inspire the attention of a very small group of people. We understand that very well. So this is not, if we had to do this, then Maya would be released already. But we realize that we have to take the ideas that we are sharing here in in a forum that is sufficiently enlightened, and transmit these questions into fables, into very, very large scale, extremely inviting, exciting, riveting fables,
Which are quote unquote sexy.
yeah, which are seductive, which are beautiful, which are made of felt tip markers. Again, an example that we'll have to kind of talk about later outside, because we talked about some evolutionary markers, and that's why we came up with the example of felt tip marker. So it's made up of these recipes of felt tip markers where you are attracted to it. It's coated with
It is all the makings of junk food, but it's actually nutritious food that you could perhaps make a new recipe out of.
We started asking ourselves, what does a cognitive gym look like? You go to the gym because it's a simulation of the forest and savanna. You exercise, you engage in activity that you were meant to engage in when you did not have sufficient sugar and fat. You run, you jump, you pull, you push. These are activities that you are meant to do in forest and savanna environments, and that's the reason why you needed sugar and fat. That's the reason why your body stored all the sugar and fat. Now that you're living in a world where you are storing sugar and fat, nevertheless you're simulating the environment of forest and savanna to use up the sugar and fat that your body did not need to store in the first place. So you create a gym, you create a simulation of forest and savanna where you do all the exercises of a gym. So we started asking ourselves, what does a cognitive gym look like? What does the avocado of culture look like? What is this healthy food that is delicious also, that that's as delicious as junk food but has nutritious effects? What does a cognitive gym look like? Where do we invite you to engage with narratives that make you move and shake your booty and jump around and run around like you would have in forest and savanna, but in doing so you end up getting the benefits of living in a civilization. You end up getting the lessons and insights and frameworks that are necessary in a world of climate crisis, of ongoing wars, of ongoing disparity, of pandemics. So that's with that design problem in mind, we started creating Maya.
And the next question we asked ourselves is, what form does it take? Anand's medium of choice is cinema. He loves writing cinema. I play games most of the time. Shreya loves, who's a producer, loves reading. What form does it take? Is it books? Is it games? Is it films? Is it graphic novel? Is it novels? And the answer we came up with was yes. It's all of these.
So that's what we've been doing for the last 4 years now. 4 years we have been working very steadily on creating this world. This is really one of the first few days that we are talking about it to a group of people. March is when we are releasing the first book. April we come out with the first board game.
This is the mock-up of the board game. It's not the final art.
This is the first board game. This is Jujutsu that Zain and team have been working on for 2 years now. And we have a plethora of stories and experiences coming out of this universe very soon. We have films, games, graphic novels. We have very large-scale games and gaming platforms. Yeah,
we simulated a new planet, a planet that's similar to our planet, but it's not our planet. We got a geologist to build that planet out for us. Astronomers to build the world around that planet. It's not Earth, it's someplace else. We got evolutionary biologists to fill up the planet with species, some of which you see mock-ups of on the screen. We got economists to build the economy, sociologists and anthropologists to build up their dynamics. And then we flooded these with stories that were urgent, stories that were allegories for the time that we live in right now. And then we decided that we'll create space for more people to tell stories. And we started pulling out stories and saying, okay, what form does this story look like? Okay, this is best told interactively. It's a game. What form does this story look like? Oh, that's a great graphic novel. So we didn't let the story the format inform the story. We just chanced upon stories or engineered stories that we thought were urgent, and we pick the format later. That's a privilege that we have had of being able to.
And the part about mythology that we spoke about, the part about lore that we spoke about, where we said that lore is an aggregate. If a story is a specific algorithm, lore is a memeplex. It's a set of multiple stories that communicate with each other, that speak to each other, that even contradict each other and challenge each other. And that's what really a mythology is. It's a place for multiple narrators and narratives to coexist and exist simultaneously, even if their worldviews and frameworks are completely different from each other. Zain and I are of the belief that change is possible. We are of the belief that a non-predatory, non-violent human future is possible. That might be far away, but Dan believes that conflict and war is a part of human condition, may or may not. I'm not sure that you.
But we want to invite that.
But we want to invite that. We want to invite that possibility, that worldview into the narrative experience of the story. Right.
Exactly. But we want to invite your question.
I don't know if either. I think both. You keep on saying that this nuance. Two things.
Sure. So there is agnosticism. There is nuance. We want all of that to exist within this world, and the way to do that, we realized, is to invite multiple Vyasas. When we think of Mahabharata, and we think of, and when we say who wrote Mahabharata, we say Vyasa wrote it, Krishna Dvep and Vyasa, if you want to be specific. but there is sufficient evidence that there were multiple Vyasas. That Vyasa was again a job title, was a
Institution.
was an institution, was a methodology, was a way of looking at creating narratives, creating stories. So this is really what it is. It's a framework of stories. It's not a story. It's not one story. Right at this point, we have finished writing about somewhere about 100 stories within this universe, which are coming out in forms of games, films, and graphic novels, etc.
And the first 5 to 10 villains set the tone. You read the novel, it's a standalone experience. But the second villain of the novel is the protagonist of the graphic novel. That doesn't mean that we are lying in either story. That doesn't mean that we are hiding anything from you. We're just showing you different perspectives, different internal expressions of the characters.
And to ensure that we have multiple worldviews in it, it's also a shared world mythology, which means that it's as we go along, we are inviting increasing number of artists and creators to participate in creating this world with us, creating this mythology with us, which takes multiple beautiful forms. So we just finished a semester at CEPT, at the CEPT School of Architecture, where 16 architecture students worked within this world and created built environments within this world under the tutorship of Shikha Parmar, this one incredible architect and academic.
What does architecture look like in a world where not everyone's a human biped? Not everyone has the same Umwelt. What does that look like? So we are going to do it in phases. Anand and I will first tone set with writing the first stories. By writing is reductive, by creating the first stories. Then people we have collaborated with in the past are going to later bring their beautiful ideas that might contradict our ideas, and there's no mandate to agree with us. Then artists who we have been inspired by are being invited, and then eventually in a couple of years the idea is to invite everyone to write a story that all of you can participate in. And I do not mean that in a tokenistic write fan fiction sort of way. I mean that actually create a lore that is cohesive but contradictory, that is multiple perspective, to change the narrative. To think that Anand and I don't know the right narrative is a lot of hubris. We have to change the narrator, and we don't know who the narrator is.
So yeah, I mean we're running out of time, so now we should dive into Q&A. If there is any question.
There's someone here. Okay, we're also someone here.
Sorry, Dan, we did not answer all your questions because some of that we had already covered. So we'd love to talk to you.
Guys have come,
We'll continue.
Yeah, but we would be happy to kind of respond to some of the questions outside as well. It's just that we have already covered quite a bit of it. Yeah.
with you.
Yeah.
Sorry about that.
Yeah, you have notes.
Sorry, I might be a little nervous, but taking in view that there are two stories that I think frees me up from reality, or I can say to interact with reality better. These are Yam Nachike's Samvad by in Katha Upanishad and The Fountainhead by Ayn Rand. So the Fountainhead by Ayn Rand. Okay, so story and games and technology.
My thoughts exactly.
Okay, so is there a way, or this is an inquiry, a story and games and technology to use making my own evil, which is due to evolution and manifestation of nature, be used to push masses for constant self-inquiry and to understand or get insight into imagined orders. Imagined orders as the Yuval Noah Harari concepts of imagined order. And finally, my body must suffer selecting my instincts to reproduce. It must select not to reproduce because climate change and all that. I'm not talking about giving up sex, like the Sahaj fun of sex. We are not talking of that. But to understand that the observer is the observed, if I say in terms of J. Krishnamurti, like that. Yeah.
So thanks. I mean, you're sharing, right?
Yeah, this was my question. A little.
How is that a question? I mean, there's just like.
No, thank you for sharing your internal.
Thanks for the
sharing your thoughts. But could you just rephrase the question?
The pinpoint of the how is it possible to use story, games, and technology to push me to self-inquiry, and not just me, everyone around me.
Have stories done that for you in the past?
I mean, you just gave examples of a lot of stories that have really done that. So I think the answer is pretty much self-evident.
And if you're asking,
and it's quite fascinating. It's quite fascinating because we used the example of Ayn Rand in exactly the opposite manner, and that's fascinating, right? You just mentioned how Ayn Rand freed your mind, and we talked about Ayn Rand's impact on policy that has been detrimental to at least some parts of the world. So it's incredible that can happen, and stories have that ability. The question that we are constantly asking is, can we use them we use stories for social engineering. We use stories for moral engineering all the time. The question that we are asking over and over again, and the question that we are most excited and invested in is, can we do that more consciously, more intentionally?
Yeah.
That's really the only
So
difference.
like I haven't read The Fountainhead completely. I am going it by like 80% I must have read, but because I
The story
don't
that
have-
influenced you the most, you have read only 80%.
Sorry, just
The
one response
reason-
to your
the reason,
question.
I'll tell you the reason, because I think when the wisdom comes to read it, I'll read that much. But
Okay.
when I haven't understood.
Don't sell
earlier
yourself short.
parts, so, yeah.
There's not much that you must have not gleaned from it. But to answer your question of how, that's not the forum. We again are saying that we don't want to just give you hacks. How do you deploy the hero's journey? How do you deploy slot machine mechanics in games? There are countless forums to do that. The question we are asking is why and to what end. The how has been answered by people across the world.
Sorry, Dan, you were saying something?
Yeah.
So I'm going to be a little provocative.
Yes, please.
We're talking about using intentional mythology to help form a better world, I guess, right? But Oppenheimer said that the surest way humans might cause their own destruction is by trying to save the world, right? So
Even the guy who's made the bomb said that that's what you ought not to do.
yeah, he was
I
saying.
mean, how is that wisdom any relevant?
But
at
he
all?
was saying the intentionality. Maybe humans have this idea that by being intentional, we'll have a good result. But oftentimes, we actually have a worse result potentially.
So again, if
I'm
it's
just being
one
provocative, I
person,
wanna say
it's
that.
again, if it's Randian philosophy, which is like one person, I am the savior of the world. I have a problem with that. But what we are trying to build is a platform that where all of us can have a samvad on what that intention. So it's a shared intentionality. It's a network effect as opposed to a Muskian. Okay, I know how the world needs to be saved, and that's the only right way of doing it.
So Buckminster Fuller has this, uses this metaphor very beautifully. He says, I get asked very often, will we ever be on board a spaceship? And I respond by saying that we are on board one. We are on board a spaceship that is 8,000 miles in diameter, that hurtles through space at 60,000 miles an hour. It is a spaceship that we are on board. But what's remarkable about Spaceship Earth is no instruction manual came along with it. We just popped on it, and we've been here for a few 100,000 years as a species now, and 3 billion years as life form, and we still haven't figured out a real instruction manual. But in a post-agrarian society, in the last 10,000 years, we have been trying to invent an instruction manual, and that's the comment that people like Oppenheimer have made, which is the observation, and that observation does carry some wisdom in spite of coming from the guy who, was crazy enough to make a bomb. It does come with some wisdom, which is that invariably our instruction manuals have not done us have not served us well, or as well as they convince us that they would.
I would argue that monolithic instruction manuals have not served us
exactly. So what I was going to come to was exactly that. But if you look at that argument is being made always about monolithic instruction manuals. When any American scholar has made that argument, they've invariably spoken about monolithic instruction manuals that invariably end up saying, this is it, this is the only truth, and every other truth is non-truth. This is the only God, and there is no other God to exist. There is only one life, there is only one death, and then it's happily ever after or sadly ever after, depending on what you've done. These are monolithic instruction manuals that also, by the way, I do think carry a humongous amount of wisdom, because the network effect of human wisdom finds its way like water does through rocks. So even in monolithic instruction manuals, I do find a great amount of wisdom against human vestiges of Stone Age behaviors that we spoke about. In a post-agrarian society, we started realizing that we don't need to be as greedy as our genes make us. We don't need to be as hungry as our genes, or jealous or envious as our genes make us. So we started creating instruction manuals to counter the instincts to be angry and hungry and hateful. So we have seen that wisdom across these instruction manuals over thousands of years, which we have refined in the form of constitutions, which we keep refining in modern democracies, which we keep refining as modern policies, which people like, anywhere from Ayn Rand to Zizek are responding to as well in their own ways, with their own limitations, with their own limited worldviews. Now, the only challenge in many of these is when they are monolithic. They do not come with an expiry date. They say, hey, this is the truth. Every other truth is not welcome. Every other way of looking at things is not welcome. Every other simulation of the future is not welcome. That becomes dangerous. What we are saying is mythology can be deployed and has been deployed for thousands of years as well to really become a framework, to become an agile, exciting, constantly evolving framework for the sum total of human wisdom to coexist, for contradictions to coexist, for it to be not monolithic, but truly be pluralistic, truly be, and not in a fancy way, but truly be pluralistic by accepting nuance, by accepting multiple worldviews coexisting with each other in ways that would make each other perhaps comfortable, uncomfortable even, because that's the method of creating civilizations. The method of creating civilizations is bringing groups of people who are very different in their histories, very different in their intentions, very different in their beliefs, still learn to coexist without predating on each other. And that is really, when we are talking about mirroring that intentionality, which has come from some total of human wisdom, which is not inherent to us, which is not biologically coded in any individual. It's a outcome of some total of network effect of humans, that where we have simulated a world, where we have for thousands of years we've been simulating a world where we can live with each other without predating on each other, without killing each other, without causing each other profound suffering and discomfort. And we have, to some extent, over the last couple of thousand years, become better and better at it. We are nowhere close to perfection, but we are definitely better than we were a few thousand years ago at it. We don't have slavery. We don't at least have slavery as it used to exist. We have economic slavery in some other forms,
or more invisible, deep-rooted forms of
but
slavery.
still people are living longer, people have more rights, people have more, there are more genders, all genders have more rights, so on and so forth. We are constantly moving, and very slowly but moving towards a dream that we have collectively agreed on. Whether or not we have put a stamp on it when we grew up is a different thing, but we have as a species collectively agreed on a dream of creating a world that is less predatory, where people suffer lesser, where people have more rights, where there is more equity, which basically means there is systemic equity. What is the difference between empathy and systemic empathy? Empathy is when you when you look at somebody with disabilities trying to cross a road, or and pause and wait and help them cross the road. Systemic empathy is where they are not at the mercy of your empathy. Systemic empathy is where they can push a button, lights will change, they can sit down on an automated wheelchair that will take them all the way to a slope into a public institution. That's systemic empathy. So we have learnt as a species to build more, to engineer systemic empathy, so that individuals are not at the mercy of each other's empathies as well. So the question we are asking constantly, and the question that we are investigating, and the question that we are invested in as creators, is how do we inspire systemic empathies? How do we inspire solutions which are as complex as the problems they are solving? If we are solving pandemic, we are not going to be able to solve pandemic by saying good versus evil. We are solving climate crisis. We're not going to be able to solve climate crisis by saying good versus evil. People who are responsible for climate crisis are people we love profoundly, So and us as well, right? So we are not going to be able to solve it. Yes,
our core principles
our core principles, that they are the prescriptions. If you think of mythology as prescription engine, as a priority engine, then that's our prescription, that's our priority.
And we'll also invite kataksh or criticism of systemic empathy. People who write stories within the universe that say perhaps it's each person for themselves, and see how that conflict, see that argument emerge.
Yeah.
Yeah, with someone at the back who raises his hand first. Okay. Yeah, okay.
Hi, Anand.
Hi.
Zain. Yeah, I have two questions. First one is, you both seem to have funny socks. Like, is that intentional? Or
No, I was wearing slippers on the way out, and I was told,
Yeah.
just wear better shoes, and this was the one kept over there.
My partner is responsible for both songs.
No, not this one. She wouldn't take the blame for Pikachu.
No, not Pikachu. Yeah.
Yeah, the second one is, so I think this is might be 9th or 10th time I'm hearing you guys speaking about barn swallows and collective markers.
I'm so sorry.
I'm so sorry. That's why we asked for show of hands. We don't want to repeat for most of people.
I
Yeah.
don't mean it as a
We actually wanted to say something else today,
Yeah.
but then we thought that there's an audience that hasn't heard
That's a new audience,
the
yeah.
thesis. So
yeah, maybe we can talk outside. But yeah, my question is, so knowing that when the first time you knew about these barn swallows and felt tip markers, how immune did it make you from having sugar? Like, do you not have sugar anymore, or like how?
I
much time
wish
did it
I
take
didn't
you?
have sugar anymore.
Yeah, I am struggling with that as well. So
400 grams a
but
day.
junk culture we don't have.
Yeah, junk culture we have cut down on largely. I have cut down on. You have stopped entirely.
Completely
I play League of Legends, but yeah, sugar, no biological.
Like I mean, okay, so just to be very, like, to have some intellectual honesty in responding to your question, sugar is such a specific question that you ask, because it's simultaneously the metaphor and the specific. Specifically, sugar we have not cut down at all, but sugar as the metaphor of everything else, jealousy, envy, anger, junk culture.
How much time did it take you once you knew this?
It's a
truth?
constant process. Like,
Constant process. You're still
do
doing
we
it?
do we experience pain when we go through heartbreak? Yes, we do.
Yeah.
Have we realized that it's not the be all and end all of life? Yes.
But again, to answer your question with complete honesty, because the question that I found myself in that place many years ago, when I started investigating whether cognizance can lead to behavior change at all, whether you can, through cognitive processes, through just intellectual processes, truly inform behavioral change. I think that's kind of the question that you're asking.
Exactly.
And the answer is yes.
And cognates change genes.
Most definitely the answer has been yes for me. What I've been able to I've not successfully cut down sugar. I'm still addicted to ice cream. But what I've successfully been able to cut down on, and quite radically, I can say, is any kind of intellectual jealousy, competition, envy, relationship-based envy and jealousy. Definitely, absolutely have no experience whatsoever of any kind of discomfort towards another individual in any form, any kind of thing.
And how that experientially manifests is, again, let's speak for both of us, we feel it in the immediate. In the moment it's happening, there is, of course, the emotional response. Do we act on it? Do we dwell on it? Do we allow it to inform our decisions, inform the way we live our life? No.
Almost never. The example that I use for that is, we have pain because, again, pain is a smoke alarm that we evolved for billions of years. Life has evolved a response to anything that pierces it, because anything that pierces life can split it apart, and the ability to then send progeny forward is lost. So pain is our response to pain, is our alarm to anything that pierces our body. But preemptively, modern humans engage in silencing that alarm in only one situation, where we preemptively cut down the wire of the smoke alarm in our houses, and that is called anesthesia. When we go through surgery, when something pierces our body, but we know preemptively that it's doing so to heal, not to destroy us, not to damage the tissue. A lot of cognitively informed behavioral change is like anesthesia, is like social anesthesia, is like psychological anesthesia, where you preemptively train yourself over and over again to calm down when such an eventuality happens. It's actually easier with complex cognitive processes than it is for actual pain. Like, I still cry at the dentist's office, but I'm increasingly, with each passing year, I've been increasingly more resilient towards emotional and cognitive triggers that would have caused pain, or that can still cause pain to a large number of people. So yes, intellectual cognitive exercises and cognitive understanding can very well inform behavior. In fact, it does inform behavior all the time. It just takes practice.
Thanks.
Another thing you said was, all this what you're talking about, you didn't come to say all this today, but you're repeating.
Yeah.
So what did you come?
Do we have 2 hours? Do we have 2 hours?
Mostly
No.
spoke about. Mostly wanted to talk about Maya, what we are doing with Maya,
The story behind Maya.
why we are building a lore, and what does that lore engine look like. So we are going to talk about not the thesis, more the function,
And the form.
But the form itself, without the thesis, would perhaps not make so much sense, because unless you read it, of course, when you experience the film, you're not going to read the essay that comes along with it.
Yeah, so this is chemotherapy, but what is cancer?
So yeah, exactly. So what is it that we are solving, and why we build this in the first place? Yeah.
Hi. So I'll just ask a quick two-part amateur question. First is to clarify and take you to your first question. Why are you doing this? So from the profound scarcity when greed arised and humans didn't know the limit when to stop. So you come in, and through storytelling, this is the medium that we can tell them, and asked to question the known. Like Kabir's example you gave, they always told their followers to question the known, get a first-hand experience. Is it the platform or the space for that?
Okay, I'm going to just paraphrase. So why are we doing what we are doing, and what is the intended effect? Is
The
that-
targeted audience.
Yeah. Imagine you are living in a coastal town, a rocky cove of sorts, and ships keep crashing. There is great merit in being the medic who repairs people, who repairs the ships, the shipwright who repairs the ship, or the medic who heals the people who have been injured. But there's perhaps a need for a lighthouse. So the ships coming to the shore can see that there is a cove over here, and there are rocks over here that they will crash into. We spend too much time being medics, which is a great thing, but some of us need to start spending time being lighthouses. That's what that emptier is.
Right, understood. And there was a civilizational effort through the ages to.
There have been multiple.
There have been multiple, and when you get to a scale, right now you are with a smaller audience. When this goes at a much bigger scale, state will step in. What are the chances for that, and how prepared are you that? Is there any alternative for this if state gets involved? Because this will have a much larger impact, behavioral impact, and maybe it will tumble down.
I mean, it's a fabulous question. It's a question that we, even with our non-fiction films, I don't know if you are familiar with the non-fiction films that we produced in the past.
Hi, Vinay.
Seen some of them, yeah. So it's a non-trivial question. It's a very important question. It's a question that we think about a lot. One way is the state does not usually concern itself with things that it does not think as immediate. Metaphor is always the method and has been the method, and you are very aware of it yourself in your question. There is so much awareness about it.
I'll just put in, when the Barn billionaire, there is a threat to that billionaire. What will be the reaction?
That's my point exactly. That by that time the threat will be all pervading. It will be all pervasive. It'll be pretty much impossible to do anything about it. That's really how revolutions have taken shape in the past. I can say it openly, and still nobody will pay the slightest attention. That's the beauty of it.
There isn't any alternative to.
Also, you bake in the correction within the system. You allow the system. You create the world, the mythology in a way that cannot be hijacked. That cannot be completely.
But it's a very big question. It's a very important question. It's not a trivial question at all. It will obviously.
It will.
If it gets to
Hopefully,
that
yes.
stage, the impact is served. I mean,
It will. But by that time, there are multiple hopes. One is that there'll be multiple authors. How do you?
Pick one.
How do you kill a swarm? You can kill.
How do you kill a philosophy as opposed to killing a individual?
It's a worldview. It's a way of being. It's a way of things. And these are techniques that we have learned from this part of the world. These are very unique to, the way worldviews have emerged in this region.
And everyone from constitution writers to Lok Shahirs have been inspirations. I think everyone has a couple of more questions before we call it a day. We have already overextended by an hour.
I'm sorry to interrupt.
Yeah.
We really have to.
We
wrap
can
up
take this
this.
outside.
We can take it outside.
All right. Thank you so much, guys. Thank you so much for your patience and indulging us. Thank you.
Let's take this conversation outside and
Yeah.
let's keep having it. Thank
Yeah,
you.
I just really woke up, so we can take outside. Yeah.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Swasa Life, for enabling this incredible conversation.